How should Europe coordinate its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic? That's the focus of today's EU leaders' virtual summit in Brussels, where heads of state are meeting to discuss the collective effort on testing, tracing and vaccines, and a huge €750 billion recovery fund. To date, there have been more than 11 million cases reported across Europe and more than 275,000 deaths. With the second wave of the pandemic sweeping across the globe, even the promise of an effective vaccine won't stop those figures from rising. Looming over today's summit is an ongoing standoff, though, over the bloc's long-term budget and coronavirus rescue package. Hungary and Poland vetoed the proposal this week in a protest at a new mechanism that requires member states to uphold European values if they want to receive EU funds. Well, with more on the summit taking place today, let's go to Brussels to speak to our correspondent, Shona Murray. Shona, very good morning to you. Let's start with the purpose of today's meeting. What's on the agenda?
Well, that's right, Rosie. As you mentioned there, really today's purpose, or the primary purpose initially, was to coordinate EU efforts around the pandemic, specifically around the distribution of the vaccine to ensure the most vulnerable member states and the most vulnerable citizens get access to it, targeting misinformation campaigns around the vaccine, and of course also having a uniform standing when it comes to test and tracing in order for the single market to reopen. So that was really the primary purpose for this virtual summit. In addition, member states had hoped to sign off on a EU-UK free trade agreement and future relationship, but that hasn't materialised yet. We know the two sides are quite far apart on certain issues, in particular fisheries. So member states will also discuss plans for a no-deal Brexit on the 1st of January if that relationship doesn't come to an agreement over the next few days. Although diplomats have said yesterday that there is hope there will be a deal, given that the cost of failure is too high. But as you mentioned there, Rosie, really what's going to dominate this meeting this afternoon is the standoff between the member states against Hungary and Poland, who effectively have vetoed and blocked the progress of the EU budget and the EU recovery fund.
You know, they were threatening to do that, but sort of this time last week, we didn't actually think they'd follow through on it, but they have. So how much has that halted proceedings and what might happen next?
Well, it's completely halted proceedings. They vetoed the progress of the budget because, as you mentioned there, they're unhappy with the rule of law mechanism, which means that member states that breach basic EU rule of law can have their payments suspended. It means that those two countries, with the support of Slovenia now, will block access for member states, particularly some of the member states that are so hardest hit by coronavirus, from getting access to their budget and the recovery fund. It also means that Hungarian and Polish citizens won't have access to that money. Remember, countries like Poland are going to get around €30 billion from the EU recovery fund alone. We heard yesterday from the Polish Prime Minister saying that he sees this as a threat to weak member states, as he said, and he said the EU is turning into an oligarchy. Now, I caught up with Federico Fabbrini from the Dublin City University School of Law and Governance, and he explained that this is a constitutional crisis.
European Union at the moment is facing a constitutional stalemate. The latest decision by Hungary and Poland to veto the MFF, the own resource decision, and next generation EU has brought to the surface an issue that had been lingering for months and indeed for years. We know that the rule of law and respect for democracy and human rights had been a point of contention in the relation between the EU institutions and the governments of Hungary and Poland for almost a decade, really, now. And the issue has inevitably spilled over onto budget negotiations.
Professor Federica Fabbrini making the point there that this rule of law issue has been lingering for in and around 10 or 12 years. The institutions, including the Council, the Parliament and so on, have failed to deal with it. And it appears that now we've reached a tipping point where the MEPs and the member states refuse to give in to countries like Poland and Hungary, who are chipping away at democracy and have been doing so for several years. Rosie?
Shona, thank you very much for the update, speaking to us there from Brussels. Sébastien Maillard is director of the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris, and he says a veto is always a difficult obstacle to overcome.
a veto is always a very difficult thing to overcome. The EU has been used to it, but a summit as we are having tonight, it's a virtual summit. So, and this to have a very sensitive issue and political issue like the rule of law, it's difficult to really deal it just through a one-night virtual summit. So it will probably take some days before we find a solution. Your reporter was right to point out that this actually is not a really completely new issue. There is those two countries, Poland and Hungary, feel really pointed and believe that they are being discriminated against, and they're making a point that the rule of law actually is more a political fight against their own ideology, and they want to raise a point there. But there's a very strong weakness in their position in that actually they need this money, and they are harming their own citizens if they don't get it. And the fact that France and other countries are perhaps suggesting we could make a separate treaty, find a solution just with the 25 countries that really want to uphold to the rule of law is a real threat to them if they don't really get those billions of euros that can be expected.
So you mentioned France and the Netherlands have got one potential option as well. But for the other member states wanting to secure that coronavirus recovery fund for their own citizens and for their own countries, what options do they actually have?
Well, the option of doing a separate treaty with 25 is really the last option we want to get to. And the German presidency, Angela Merkel, who is, as you know, running the Council of the EU right this semester, wants, I think, goes to the diplomatic channel and try to find perhaps some declaration that could be added to this agreement where Poland and Hungary would be reassured that there would be no arbitrary using of this new instrument. It's true, it's the first time that we are conditioning the respect of the rule of law to enjoying benefits of the EU budget. So it's a new procedure. But I'm confident that the German presidency, which really has made this recovery plan the priority for the EU, wants to find a diplomatic solution with Hungary and Poland. Remember that Viktor Orban belongs to the same political family as Angela Merkel, the European Popular Party, the EPP, and so and also Hungary and Poland see that as part of Slovenia, there have been many more partners. Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Austria, they are not at all with them on this issue. So I think they can find some solution on a diplomatic way.
So certainly Angela Merkel's going to be looking at pursuing that. But from the perspective of Hungary and Poland, what's their game plan here? What's their strategy? Because if they scupper this for everyone, they scupper it for themselves too.
It's a very good point. And actually, one may wonder why they are doing this. And even last week, we all thought they were just bluffing, that they wouldn't really do it because this is raising even harm among their citizens. We know that in Poland, the majority of the ruling party is very narrow. There are 6 parties in Hungary that have really now opposing Mr. Orban in Hungary on this, and citizens may feel that their own government is not protecting them. So I'm not sure how far they can go on this track, but they really want to show that they have their own alternative view on the rule of law. And even if we find some declaration or some way of getting through this, the fundamental question, this almost cultural war that is behind this, will take more time to really and need more dialogue between those countries and the rest of the EU.